Well, hello and welcome back to our final panel of the conference, which comes to us from Mexico City. Um, I am so delighted to introduce our this group of people. Our panel is composed of three remarkable women who are bridge builders in multiple contexts. Our first panelist is Maria Cristina Fernandez Hall, who holds a PhD in sociology, focusing on the reintegration of deportees and returnees in Mexico through the arts. She received her PhD from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And we congratulate her because her defense was very recently. So this is very exciting. I think this might be her first appearance as Dr. Fernandez. So bienvenido, ¿eh? She has actively participated in Otros Dreams en Acción, an organization by and for returnees and deportees for the last 5 years. A member of Red Norteamericanista, she translates for Voices of American at UNAM's Center for Research on North America, as well as for Mapping Hispanic Modernity at the Open University of Catalonia. She studied creative writing and political science at Columbia University and has a master's in translation studies from Universitat Pompeu Fabra. She recently published a poetry collection in Sueños de la Malaria, published by Herring Publishers in 2020, and Fantasía Fértil, published by Editorial Medusa in 2022. And she has co-translated several novels from Catalan alongside Megan Berkobian. Dr. Fernandez Hall's academic work can be found in the book Sanctuarios Educativos en Mexico, published by Universidad Veracruzana in 2018. And the forthcoming Factoring Immigration in the Rise of U.S. as a Great Power will be published in Edinburgh University Press and in Canada y sus paradojas en el siglo XXI by UNAM in 2022. Dr. Fernandez Hall, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Very honored that you invited me. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of my recent experience. I'm sharing a PowerPoint presentation here. Let me know if you can see it. How's that?
We can indeed.
Okay, great. Right, as David was saying, sorry, there's a motorcycle just coming by right now. I just finished a PhD at UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, about a week ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my dissertation and some of the case studies in it. So my dissertation was called The Arts as an Integration Vehicle for People Deported or Returned from the US to Mexico. And I basically did this research alongside Otros Dreams en Acción, which is an organization, it's a grassroots organization for people who are returned and deported living in Mexico City, as well as with a few other organizations. Let's see if I can change slides. There it is. So my main thesis is that the arts provide a way of articulating community and projecting the demands, feelings, and identities of deportees and returnees, and that the arts can influence public discourse and, by extension, affect public policy as well. So the main focus of this work was community organizing, translocal visibilization, ties of solidarity, and the main idea is that people who are deported or returned are inherently transnational, and therefore we should really be listening to what they're expressing when we're trying to build relations between countries. So what is the context of the return, people who are returned and deported in Mexico? So what I propose in my dissertation is that we're in a context of cruel transnationalism. So first we have market forces that push migration from Mexico to the US because salaries are 9 times greater in the US than in Mexico. There's precariousness in Mexico, there's violence. And so here I rely on Saskia Sassen. But then people in the United States are denied status, and that keeps them exploitable and deportable, which compromises their ability to organize. Then upon return, there's really a second exile because in Mexico, they're usually also undocumented upon return. And even though the sending and receiving communities are interwoven, there is horrible separation. So people are separated from their families that they left in the US, or maybe they come back to Mexico and they don't even know anybody anymore, especially if the migration took place during childhood. And there isn't really a guarantee of the rights to health, housing, dignified work, education, voting, and culture. So people face a lot of issues when they return or are deported. I use the word return also because a lot of people, especially women, aren't sometimes deported, but because of their undocumented status, maybe they can't get scholarships to continue into university education or jobs that they would like. So some people return, or they return also in the face of a potential deportation or a family member being deported. So anyway, once they're in Mexico, as I said, communities are separated between the US and Mexico. There's a lack of networks. It's very hard to transfer education and job opportunities because of a lot of the paperwork involved and the language differences and the wages. It sounds silly, but it's true that education is very hard to transport. One person who returned that I know tried to get into university in Mexico, but the paperwork was such that it took her 3 years. And then there's problems with housing, especially because people are asked for guarantors when trying to rent, and people who don't have communities in Mexico don't really have a guarantor. Then there's a problem with getting identity documents and financing. And there's also discrimination against how people speak, or if they have tattoos. People are often criminalized or viewed as criminals just because they've returned. So yeah, and at the same time, there have been several steps backward in terms of government programs. So this program is called Tres por Uno, which would kind of give funding for social projects among migrant communities, was canceled, as was the Migrant Support Fund. And I think similar to what Kathleen Arnold was saying, I do focus on epistemicide. So the idea that there's a genocide of meanings, and that there's been a devaluation of non-Eurocentric thinking that has delegitimized the expressions of people who are deported or returned in Mexico. But I think I view the arts as a way of projecting these meanings in order to put their needs out there and to secure more allies, empathy, and make changes in public policies. So the greatest challenges are really discrimination, and also that Mexico, like the government, focuses a lot on migrants beyond the borders because they contribute with remittances, while there isn't really an intersectional focus for guaranteeing the rights of return migrants, specifically in terms of work, housing, education, and identity. And there's also the shame that I spoke about and the discrimination. So for my dissertation, I participated in several projects, which I write about sort of as case studies. In some of these projects, I helped organize. Sometimes I did more administrative work. But yeah, so I'll talk about them. The first one is called Cubrebocas Campaign, and we can see this picture here of these face masks. And in this project, ODA, Otros Dreams en Acción, the grassroots organization I mentioned earlier, made and sold face masks in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then this income was used, well, to pay the people who made the face masks, who were part of the return community, but also to distribute food to people who really needed it during the pandemic, especially in the migrant community, but also beyond. More than 400 boxes of food were distributed with the income from these face masks. The second project is called Duelo en Resistencia, and it's sort of a Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos vigil, in which there was a transnational vigil for migrants who have passed away while migrating, like during the trajectory, and also due to COVID-19, which, as we know, impacted the migrant community very disproportionately in the United States. Then there were several workshops also. So we made some traditional poems that are usually written for the Day of the Dead called Calaveritas, slam poetry. There were stencils protesting the death of one man who was deported with the collaboration of the consulate in Washington State, and then came to Mexico, but he actually needed blood transfusions every day, and those weren't guaranteed when he came back, so he died. So this is a protest altar that was put up in front of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico City during that vigil. And there was also another altar that was put up at the Mother's Monument, and that was in protest of the accusations of forced sterilization in ICE facilities in the United States. Then the third project was with another organization. It's actually a magazine called Mi Valedor, and it is distributed by people who are in precarious housing situations. So Oscar Rodriguez, who was deported to Mexico, wrote a piece about his migratory experience. It is very cool because it's in Spanglish and very creative, and he published it there. So I analyzed that for my thesis. And then the fourth project is called Narrar Nuestra Ciudad Refugio, and that was a transnational project that was held first in Casa Refugiados in Mexico City, but also in Coventry in the United Kingdom. So a group of people who have migratory experience wrote stories, poems, and made collages, and they're going to be translated and shared like across the two groups, across borders. And the final project is called Florecer Aquí y Allá Dos, and that was also with ODA, in which groups and organizations and individuals who have migrated or have experienced that across North America and Central America met to discuss identity, borders, and migration. And a lot of products were made with the narratives that we found in these discussions. For example, a collective zine, collages, play, and a lot more. So anyway, can we say that these kinds of actions have had any sort of impact internationally or in policy? Well, it's a mixed bag. As I said, the 3x1 program and the migrant support program fund were canceled. There was also a program called Programa Paisano that had houses in several cities across the United States, including Chicago, and that was canceled, and the contents of the program also changed so that now they don't really focus on return migration, but more on Mexicans who come to Mexico as tourists. And then we also have a National Guard here that's chasing migrants, allegedly migrants who aren't Mexican nationals. But I mean, we've seen videos of the National Guard sort of using stereotypes and just sort of going against migrants all around, including deported people. So it hasn't really been a very positive last few years. At the same time, we can say that through these transnational projects and art projects, people do find a community and can resolve their problems through these alternative channels, right? So even Otros Dreams en Acción, often they get in touch with universities and they try to secure public speaking engagements for people who are returned and deported so that they can get visas and go to the United States and see their families. So all these different channels are used thanks to the international connections that are made through these projects. So I think the most important thing that could happen to have better collaboration with the Mexico City government would be for there to be more intersectionality. ODA produced this document. I don't know if you can see it here. It's called Retorno Digno, and it's got 10 policy recommendations for Mexico City to be more welcoming to return migrants. For example, they've proposed having a one-stop shop where you go to this migration station and you can get all of your IDs, enroll in school, enroll in health services, and to have it be with government officials who are actually trained in the migrant rights perspective. So yeah, as for relationships between Mexico City and the greater world, I think that in these cases we did see a lot of successes in that sense. So Duelo en Resistencia, the one that was the Day of the Dead vigil, had people join in from Mexico City, Tijuana, Tapachula, Morelos, but also Leipzig in Germany, Brooklyn, Staten Island, El Paso, and Seattle in the United States. So it was very international. And the same was true of the other project called Florecer Aquí y Allá, the one that dealt with narratives. People connected from California, from New York, from Central America, all kinds of places. And I do think that these projects sort of help hold Mexico City accountable. But it's also true that Mexico City is a true destination for people who want to settle and work when, like after migration, especially people who are returned. A lot of them aren't actually from Mexico City, but if they want to settle in Mexico and have a pretty decent job, they'll go to Mexico City instead of staying at the border. So there's really a lot of potential among these people who I think we should view as transnational and who really have skills that could be very beneficial to Mexico City. So I think that they really do deserve proper government attention. And I think that this is a chance for Mexico City to be portrayed as open and cosmopolitan. So in this sense, like if we consider whether this is diplomacy, we could view Constantino and how he displaces diplomacy from being this highbrow act of the state. And we can also look at Antonio Alejo, who talks about migrant diplomacy, but also global citizenship education. So he views the return and migrant community as particularly skilled when talking about decolonization and what really a rights-based society would look like. So I think that here we do have an instance of parallel diplomacy in which we have diplomatic acts that are like an exchange in cultural products and narratives from cities and from informal groups and NGOs instead of really emanating from power. So we have encounters between specific groups that inhabit certain localities rather than this top-down diplomacy. And the cool thing about this is that the narratives and knowledge of people in movement through these projects get placed at the center, sort of displacing all of the stereotypes that have led to exclusionary policies. And it also helps people with similar experiences be able to connect because the arts in the end act as a bridge in which people can see themselves and share in their mutual experiences. So, okay, has there been collaboration so far? Yeah, there has. In 2021, ODA and the government of Mexico City participated in drafting these measures for inclusion in terms of the right to identity. So it was all about accepting different IDs that weren't only the voting ID, which is sort of the dominant ID in Mexico that you need for everything. And the problem with that ID is that you, first of all, need a proof of address in order to get it. And a lot of people who are deported don't have an address. And if you don't have an address, you need 2 witnesses. But if you don't have a community, you don't really have witnesses either. And these IDs aren't given during electoral times. So there can be months-long pauses in the emission of these IDs. And also sometimes they can be expedited from the United States, I mean, given by consulates, but they're not always accepted in Mexico City. I mean, in Mexico in general, but also in Mexico City. There's also been some progress because Morena representative presented a bill called Ley de Retorno, and it does talk about Social Security and protecting the family unit, health, the presumption of innocence, accepting foreign IDs, not requiring proof of address, and a lot of cool things. And a lot of organizations were consulted. I do think it's sort of odd that this is all coming right as the presidential elections are underway and after all of the previous programs were canceled, though. So we'll have to see how, if this bill passes and if it's going to be implemented, because there was a change in the law in 2017 that would have made getting into schools a lot easier, but it hasn't really been implemented, and it's been like 5 years. So yeah, so it's a pretty mixed bag. I mean, as we saw in Duelo en Resistencia, there have been protests outside of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There was also a protest when the chief of government in Mexico City met with a group of dreamers, and people from ODA came and said, it's awesome that you're meeting with dreamers, but all the other members of the migrant community are excluded because we weren't part of the DACA program, you know, and they weren't really paid attention to, and they were treated more like dissidents. So I think it would really be beneficial if Mexico City came off as a place of free speech, diversity, and intersectional rights. And I think that through all these arts and public actions, there's really an opportunity for dialogue. So thank you so much. All set.
Thank you so much, Maria. And what a wonderful and intricate portrait that you've painted of all of the different ways that people are visualizing a different way of approaching the subjects that you've just considered. So thank you so much for starting us off. And so at this point now, I'd like to turn and welcome our second speaker, and that would be Leticia Susana Cruikshank Soria. Susana is a sociologist and the president of the Center for Studies on International Cooperation and Public Management, where she works with civil society organizations and scholars, doing research on issues of international cooperation for development in Mexico, the right to decent work, and domestic labor mobility. She conducts research and crafts proposals for sustainable development projects, civil society institutional strengthening, and analysis aimed at promoting the transformation of socio-environmental conflicts. Susana's work also seeks to strengthen the human and labor rights of domestic agricultural migrants and international migrants by promoting dialogues among different actors at both the bilateral and multilateral level. So Susana, welcome. We are so pleased that you are joining us today.
Thank you, David. And thank you for this invitation and for letting me share with the students and the people here, with the public, all our experience. Well, I'm not going to talk specifically on Mexico City, but in particular, I will refer to the importance of citizen diplomacy and cities in labor mobility. And that's what we do in CICIG. Sorry for my English is not the best, but I'll try to do it the best. Well, as I know that you know, I don't want to go deep in about this, the citizen action beyond the citizen diplomacy. Just diplomacy is not just for states, but we know that public diplomacy, all actors or many actors, we are doing this. And in this particular issue, I'm gonna talk about the impact of the agricultural labor mobility and cities. Well, as you know, all cities are really a pole of a global economy, more in this part of economy flows of goods around the world, no? And in particular, I'm going to talk about this mobility of people and goods, how the participation of some labor agricultural workers are beginning to be in this national and regional and international spaces. For this to happen, cooperation is being really important to happen, cooperation among different actors. And what I want to share is that in these national and international spaces, it's being difficult to allocate the participation of domestic labor agricultural workers, this domestic migration, no? The importance of them, of their participation, of put their rights in the agenda, the human rights in the agenda, it's not being easy, no? I think that it's important to say that diplomacy, public diplomacy or citizenship diplomacy has to have a principle, and this principle is to being linked to territories and actors. So when we as CICIG are in these national or international spaces and we talk about their rights, we don't want to talk be representing them. We really would like them to be there, and this is the main challenge. As you, David, asked us to put some of the challenge that we have, and I think that this is the principal challenge. You know, in Mexico, agricultural laborers, day laborers, that they are always mobilizing from the south, the states of the south of Mexico, from the north of the Republic of Mexico. Some of them go to the United States. But the majority of them from Chiapas, Oaxaca, Veracruz, they go to these states at the north, like Sonora, Chihuahua, Sinaloa, where this international trading, it's being deepenly, se está intensificando. Sorry for this word, but well, so they are, the most of them, they are indigenous people, and the most of them travel in families. It's important to say that they have a very, they have been excluded for decades, so their own identity, it's being like not evaluated. So it's hard for them to speak in some spaces, no, in some, even at national level, even to defend their own rights. We are working with them to strengthen their own identity. That's one of their main projects that we have. The first is that they can speak for them, and when they cannot, we are going to some spaces here in some public instances with these governments, local and national level, but we're beginning to go to these international levels and regional level, where it is important to say that domestic migrant laborers are being excluded from their rights, from the system, and their education, their access to education, their access to health, the access to decent work is not being accomplished. So that's the main demand that we have. But the main challenge is to take them to these spaces. As you know, the majority of them speaks their own language, Mixteco or Zapoteco. So in this way, it is harder for them to speak even in Spanish, no? So what we have found is that we have many actors that are being in solidarity with us, even in the United States. Some university like you, like the people, this university in Ventura County, we found that they have been a very, very main strength to Mixtecos. For example, they have a program where they teach English and Spanish to the Mixtecos that migrate to California. And this is a very important program that we are working with, because even in the Montaña de Guerrero, Guerrero's mountain, there is the main labor, the migration, and it is really important for us to have a civil society organization, universities, and some other actors that are strengthening their capacities, and we're working together for do this, and in order to really elevate their livelihoods. No, this is the main objective of CSIG, and that's why we are really interested in strengthening their capacities, their own self-esteem, for them to be the people that speaks for them, no, for their own rights, their rights. And well, I'm going to try to answer the questions that David gave. What is the nature, the first note of our force to build bridges and promote cooperation and collaboration among those that we work with? And as I said, migrant agricultural day laborers are vital for the activity of cities, and that's really important to say it and to bold. About 90% of the food on our tables comes from the land. Many of these agricultural laborers stay in Mexico, but others migrate to the United States, and some of them go to Canada. Cities are the main actors that drive the work of agriculture, in the sense that is where is negotiated and traded prices and all that is in the market in these products, basic products. Around Mexico City are several rural localities with agricultural day laborers who migrate to certain times of the year to other states of Mexico. Mexico City is the main important city where all this trade and all these negotiations take place. That's why even I put my main issue on cities as a pole of growth and economies. In the case of Mexico, Mexico City is the main city where these negotiations and main actors have to, they are there, no? The construction of a social subject that is conceived as social subject rights is the first step, as I told you, to begin to interact with others at the national level first. That's our main challenge, and then at international and regional levels, no? It is important to say that in this case that CSIC's work really is try to give them to bring their voices to these spaces, but as I said before, mainly to try to take them for them to speak there, that we don't have to represent them. That's our main challenge. And what do you attribute your greatest success? Well, first, we attribute it to giving them their voice and giving the voice to those who have not had voices in some main spaces of decision taking, no? We try to make sure that they are in these spaces, and we try to collaborate with all actors, making dialogue, constructing dialogue among all actors, but in these agendas, putting their voices there, their demands, their main demands, and fundamentally strengthen the cooperation and the commitment from all actors. And in this case, we're involving now some companies that are having these human rights principles, and we're trying to make dialogue with them in the space of United Nations. This is very important for us. There's a space at United Nations where entrepreneurs, some international companies are being there, talking about good practices. We're talking to them too, and we think that this is the main actor. In the second place from the states. States, they have the main responsible to accomplish their rights, but then companies, I think that they are the second actors that have to accomplish with it. And as I told you, our partners beyond borders are being civil society organizations in the United States, in Canada, and some universities too. And mainly, I think that we're beginning to, as I told you, to have dialogues with some companies, international companies that are being employing in Mexico some agricultural labor days. And well, mainly these are the main actors who we are talking to. And I think that at national level, our work is being really evaluated. We work in some networks, the Red Nacional de Jornaleros y Jornaleras, and we're working in other some civil society networks that we're being supported for some foundation, international foundation, as Sabina. We're working in Periplos project. In Periplos project, we are working with many other organizations that are working, having direct dialogue with companies at this due diligence in the United Nations. But we're constructing some chains and nets who we're having dialogues with many different actors and putting in the agenda the human rights and labor rights of these domestic migrant laborers. So I think that I'm going to try to close saying that all the cities that receive labor migrants in the United States, here in Mexico, and even in Canada, that many labor workers are going to Canada, if they begin to create spaces where all the actors begin to construct dialogue, and we can put the rights of these domestic labor, agricultural laborers, if they make these spaces and they try to let them speak by their own, maybe we, CICIG, are not going to have work in 10 years. And we hope that, because if the objective of our work is accomplished, if this indigenous family can have their voices there and can begin to have a decent life, maybe we as a CIG will not have any more to work with this. And sorry again for my English. I hope that I could give the main issues that we are working on at national, at least regional level. And thank you very much.
Susanna, thank you so much for that talk. I can assure you, your words were quite clear and very inviting and engaging. I particularly appreciated how you emphasized the importance of allowing people to have their own voices and to speak for themselves on their own behalf. And also this, the fact of different regions of Mexico being the beginnings of different people's migrant journeys. And so it's not simply a relationship among countries, but the intra-Mexican relationship. So thank you so very much for that. So let us now turn to our final speaker for this panel, and that would be Mariana Flores Mayen, who is the General Director for International Relations and Cooperation of Mexico City. Mariana holds a master's degree in international relations from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. I see a pattern here because now we have more than one PhD from the same fine institution. Mariana was also a member of the team that created the Regional Office for Latin America and Global Fund for Cities Development, the FMDV. And from 2016 to 2022, she was its regional director. Since 2016, she has been the regional director for North America of the World Association of Major Metropolises, called Metropolis. Mariana has also coordinated and participated in writing publications in the field of international relations of local governments and urban development planning. Mariana, welcome. We are so pleased that you are with us.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for the opportunity of to share our experience here in Mexico City, now from the government side. So please let me share my screen, and just to confirm that you're looking at
Yes, you can. And we can see you're doing it. Very good.
Perfect. So again, this is me talking about from the Mexico City government perspective on how we think our city as a global city. And it has been clear from the previous panelists that the international relations of the city do not go only or mainly through the government, but there are a lot of organizations, people, organized and non-organized, that help build this city as a global city. So from my side, I would like to share three main things. One, this legal and institutional framework where we stand. Two, the international strategy that we established from the last period of government, which started by the end of 2018. And finally, trying to do, because I find really interesting this conceptual work that you have been doing between urban diplomacy and city diplomacy. So I think the work that we do at the International Relations Office kind of builds a bridge between those kinds of diplomacy. And just saying that the work that we do not only focus on diplomacy, but it takes a huge part of our work. So maybe you know, and maybe you don't, but Mexico City is a big city in terms not only of its surface, but of the population. In Mexico City, we have 9.2 million inhabitants, but we are part of a metropolitan area of 22 million. A lot of those 20 extra millions come daily to Mexico City to work, study, etc. So as the previous speaker said, Mexico City really has been historically a financial, cultural, and political hub. So even if we as a government do not do anything to coordinate the international relations of our government and some other stakeholders, we do have international relations. We see ourselves as an intercultural city, and our government has established a commitment toward the global agendas, not only Agenda 2030 and its goals, but also other agendas, thinking the New Urban Agenda, the Paris Agreement, Agenda 21st of Culture, etc. So first, thinking on the legal and institutional framework, it has been a long journey now in building the capacities, legal and institutional capacities, to better coordinate our international relations. In the political constitution of Mexico City from 2017, there's a specific article, Article 20, that defines the principles and the priorities of the international relations of Mexico City. So this is the first time that a legal document of the city considers its international nature. Then also we do reporting to the local Congress in order to have transparency and accountability. Every 6 months, we present these reports to the Congress and listing some of the main activities that we as an office promote, but also integrating the activity, the international activities of the government. As you may see, this is a huge city, so trying to coordinate these efforts is really complicated, but this is why we created an international cabinet. This is a space for dialogue. It is a space for decision-making, and where we invite focal points from each of the city departments to come and share what they are doing internationally, to listen to what we as an office are preparing or are working for them, and also to do some of these reporting activities that I mentioned. One is this report to the Congress, but later on I'm going to refer on how important for us is reporting to other stakeholders beyond our borders. And just to say, institutionally, our office has 4 areas. So one focus on international relations, the links between our office and our government with international stakeholders. Also an area of cooperation, focusing on projects specifically, not only city-to-city cooperation, but also with some national agencies of cooperation, etc. We have an area of protocol, of course, that deals mainly with visits from presidents, mayors that come to Mexico City, and also arranging the agenda of our chief of government. And an area of special projects, which gathers a lot of other things that we do in our daily work. So this is how this legal and institutional framework that I present has taken quite a long time to build. The first Office of International Relations was opened in 1997. So from there, we have worked a lot to articulate better and to give us the proper tools to better do our work. And as I mentioned, this new administration came to office in December 2018. And we decided to establish a strategy that was very closely linked to the government program. This government program was not only developed through a lot of consultation processes through the months previous to taking office, but also it took into consideration all these global agendas that I already mentioned. So in this office, we cannot think of our work without having a relationship with what are the needs and these strategic lines of the government program. So at the very beginning, these 6 big areas of work were established: equality of rights, sustainable city, more and better mobility, Mexico City as a cultural capital of the Americas, zero aggression and more security, and science, innovation, and transparency. So in these huge boxes, let's say, we have a lot of programs, projects, and activities that go that help us achieve these objectives. So our work, having this platform, this thematic platform, we decided to structure it in 3 big areas, which are learning. Let's say, how do we share what we are doing, but also how we get knowledge from other cities and other stakeholders that have been going through the same issues that us. Also leadership. We know that Mexico City, because of its dimension, because of its history, it's seen as an example in different processes. So how do we maintain and increase that leadership, and how our experience can be useful not only for ourselves, but also for other cities and other citizens? And the third one, linked to this one, is citizenship, which is being aware that international relations are not only from the government perspective, but how can we motivate the participation of our citizens abroad, and also all the opportunities that we find at the international level, how can we make them a little bit more concrete to our people and to our citizens? So this is a big challenge, again, because sometimes what happens in the international events that we participate may sound kind of abstract or kind of far away from what we are living here, but this is kind of also the work that we try to do to translate those ideas, concepts, experiences to our daily experiences. So how do we try to do that link? I'm going to share 2 examples only, because we know we don't have a lot of time, but 2 examples where I see that we are trying or doing our best to do these efforts to link with local actors and the international stakeholders. So our commitment to the global development agendas, as I mentioned, we have been doing a lot of efforts in creating spaces for dialogue with different stakeholders within Mexico City, and trying to see how they are working to achieve this Agenda 2030 and other global agendas. What is the work that they are doing? How can we complement each other? And also, one of the things that we have been doing is communicating this virtually or in a digital way. Let's say we have a website which gathers all the different efforts that the departments do to attain these global agendas. So we have this specific digital space where they can share what they are doing and try to have this dialogue also with people from outside the city, but also with local stakeholders. And also we have done some campaigns in the public transportation, not only saying, okay, this is SDG 1, SDG 5, which may not say anything to the local population, but saying how does your daily life, your daily activities can relate to these global agendas, or how can we all as citizens contribute to a more sustainable city? And this has also helped us to have a better dialogue outside. So we participate in different spaces. At the right picture, for example, is a recent event in the framework of the High-Level Political Forum in the United Nations, but also with city networks. As I mentioned, we do also international reporting, voluntary local reviews, and the very first voluntary gender review that we did with one of the city networks that we are part of. And this is how also we established that dialogue, that advocacy with other stakeholders outside our borders. And another example is the work that we do at the level of city networks. City networks, we cities of different dimensions, of different continents gather and try to work together to find solutions to our different challenges, but also to have a common voice in these international spaces. So thinking on what we do to have this dialogue internationally and to promote the work that we are doing, I want to share these examples. For example, with UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments, we have an international award regarding culture. So we as organizers with this city network identify important experiences abroad and help them to have this visibility. But also we were named in 2021 Capital of Culture from Iberoamerica. We participate in the different statutory meetings from these networks, as it was the case in Metropolis in Brussels last summer. We also participate, for example, Brookings Institute has this SDG Leadership Cities, where we share a little bit on what we are doing to implement the global agendas in our territories. And Change, which is the City Hub and Network for Gender Equity, where we try to solve and have a dialogue on how are we working to make our cities more equitable in terms of gender. So this is how we work. We do cooperation, we do advocacy, we share our experiences, we learn from each other, but also at the local level, how do we make those dialogues and those partnerships useful for our people? So for example, in the first picture, you see a meeting. This was a launch that we did with C40, one of the city networks that we participate in, which is a mentorship program, which helps women to strengthen and make possible their projects in terms that have a sustainability component. So this was the event where we launched this initiative, and now we are 2 or 3 months that the mentorship program began, and it has been really important in terms of finding also new partnerships that help us really build this proper environment for these women entrepreneurs to develop their initiatives. And the second one is a recent meeting also that we had in the framework of two important cultural cooperation projects, which was gathering politicians, civil society, private sector, and citizens as individuals to try to think on how to build better cultural policies for our city. So this is how we try to bring all those experiences and all that work that we are doing in a more concrete way. And yeah, I think that's it. Here are our networks if you want to follow us and see the work that we are doing. I'm happy to share with you this experience. And yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Mariana, thank you so very much for that presentation. And I was really struck by the fact that, all three of our speakers have spoken of the idea of the role of citizens in the practice of representing the City of Mexico. And there's a number of questions that have been posted, but I also want to encourage people who have not yet done so to place a question in the Q&A portal at the bottom of our screen. One of the questions that was posed was Mariana, in the last part of her presentation, noted that the Mexican city government wants to encourage the participation of citizens in the international relations of Mexico City. Given the way that Mexico City diplomatically projects itself in the world is reflected in all three of the presentations that we have just seen. So the question is, what do the three of you feel are the best approaches to promote a deeper level of collaboration between urban diplomats, such as Maria and Susana, and city diplomats, such as Mariana? So let's go back and go backwards and start with our first speaker, Maria, if you would be so kind as to speak to that, and then Susana, and then to Mariana.
Hi, that's a really interesting question. I think that there could be more work perhaps in organizations inviting the government to functions and the government being more attentive to like the social networks of various human rights organizations in the city, right? So at least for Otros Dreams and Acción, they're constantly posting about activities or about protests or certain demands. So I think that if there could be some kind of a channel for dialogue in which these organizations aren't taken as anti-government, then that would be good. Because I think often, especially in the most recent Mexican government, there's a tendency to view the people, the electorate, voters, as one united front, or as people who have to be fully on board with everything that's happening from the government. And there hasn't really been much space for criticism and dialogue that's more open and non-confrontational. So I think that would be a really good step. And certainly a lot of different members of the government have attended different meetings and shown interest in Otros Dreams and Acción's work, but I think it could definitely go further. And I think especially, what I would really encourage anyone at the government, for example, Mariana, but maybe someone less in international affairs, would be to check out this document, Retorno Digno, because it really has like the 10 points that all the things would be necessary for a better return. Antonio Alejo also posted a question, but I'll do that one later, maybe, and talk about those points. Oh, I can't hear you right now, David. I think you're on mute.
I will pose that one after everybody
Okay,
has had
awesome.
a go at this one. Absolutely.
Cool.
Susana, would you like to speak to that question?
David, thank you. I'm agree with Maria Cristina, and I would say that a main difference, it's that building citizenship or diplomacy citizenship has a lot of steps, and it is different to make diplomacy from cities. No, you're a citizen when you assume your rights, when you demand them, and you can do diplomacy, no, when you have some specific culture, then you can speak to others demanding your rights or the demand that you have in the way that you ensure that you're gonna ensure your objectives, no, but I think that maybe it's different from cities. Maybe you have different ways to do in a city, in a big city. Or as I said, in the case of these laborers, some spaces that you go exactly to the city. But the first step is to build the capacity to make this kind of dialogue in different spaces. It's like building a diplomatic citizenship, I mean.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Mariana, would you speak to this question, please?
Yeah, so I do agree that it takes a lot of steps to go through these processes. I mean, building trust between different organizations, between government, citizens, organization takes a lot of time. And I think it's something that we have to take step by step, but guaranteeing that we do not take steps back. So this is one of the biggest challenges in terms, because it doesn't have to do also only with political will, but also with resources and with a lot of other elements around those processes of dialogue. But my feeling is that, or at least what we have been doing in the International Relations Office, is trying sometimes to bring those experiences and knowledges and that we have been taking from all over the world, and not only this office, meaning also the representatives of the government that have had the opportunity to share with others. Try to make them as concrete as possible, and trying to land them as possible, because otherwise we would be only representing, let's say, a very small portion of the people here in Mexico City. So a big challenge to make it more inclusive for all.
Thank you very much. I have a question now that Maria referenced, and that is from Antonio Alejo, who I want to point out was the curator of this roundtable. And and his question just disappeared, but I'm going to, I have memorized it. And so he asks, and he posed this originally to Maria, but I think that all three of you can speak to that. And that is, would you view Mexico City as a welcoming city for those who have been deported? And if your answer is yes, that's going to be a very short answer. But if your answer is no, then I think the follow-up would be, what needs to be done in order to make it more welcoming? And let's start with let's do our order again and start with Maria.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I accidentally moved the question, I think, on the Q&A. But I would say that there's definitely more that could be done to make Mexico City more welcoming. I see, was this question for returnees and deportees specifically? Yeah, for deported people. So there are actually no shelters for people who are deported to Mexico City. So I think that's like the number one thing, that when people arrive, on a flight or on a bus, a lot of them end up immediately homeless. So I think that would be one really important step, would be to have some kind of shelter for returnees. And then also, as I said, ODA specifically advocates for opening a one-stop shop in which you can get your various IDs, such as the voter ID, the CURP, which is kind of like a social security number, your birth certificate. It's very different from the United States, where you can just go and like print your birth certificate. Now there are actually ways of printing it online, but first you have to have it officially registered. So there's still a lot of institutional barriers. And I think that one-stop shop would help it, so that people don't have all their rights channeled through different institutions, but instead have people that actually have a human rights and migrant rights perspective, guaranteeing their right to identity, housing, and education, and health. So I think there's that. There's also the question of the minimum wage. It's quite low compared to the cost of living that has really surged in Mexico City. Part of the reason behind the surge, obviously, is inflation, but there's also the fact that Mexico City has been really welcoming to Airbnb to the detriment of renters and people who are trying to make a living here. So I think that's also an important consideration, like what can be done in terms of rent control and housing inclusion. There could be also more done in terms of addressing people's emotional wellness after the trauma of migrating, being detained, being deported. So there could be more of that, and there could be more collaboration. I think this would actually concern the mayor's office more, would be collaboration in terms of family visitations. So that has been done for Dreamers, where there are these coordinated trips in which Dreamers can come to Mexico City, check out, the UNAM, visit with the mayor, the jefa de gobierno, all kinds of stuff. But if that were opened up to more people who aren't only Dreamers, I think that would really help in terms of family reunification and just the right to see like your children, your parents, etc. That could really be something that the government could spearhead in terms of foreign affairs. And yeah, I still think that people are very often boxed in terms of their employment here in Mexico City. So a lot of people who are deported only work in call centers because their English is viewed as an asset, but it's quite limiting for people who have other kinds of skills. So if there could be more of a perspective of human rights in terms of hiring, where people aren't discriminated because of their tattoos or where certain forms of ID aren't asked for, that would be good too. So thank you so much, Antonio Alejo, a much admired colleague in the same field.
Mariana, if you would be so kind as to speak to the question.
Yeah, thank you. So I do think we have a lot of way to go still, and but I do feel like we are a welcoming city. One of the things that I believe is one of the greatest challenge is to put all these efforts together. Let's say there are a lot of civil society organizations, the private sector, a lot of different stakeholders within the city that are doing a lot of great work. And I think one of the challenges is to bring all those efforts together and how not to divide and but to add the work that we are doing. And that goes in terms of legislation. I think one of the most important cities that has advanced in terms of legislation for welcoming returned people is Mexico City. And then it has to that legislation has to be translated into institutional efforts and resources, of course. So again, as kind of the same thing that I mentioned in the previous question, it has to be steps, baby steps maybe, but going always forward. And I do believe that the biggest challenge is that to make all the voices being heard, and then after that, add all the efforts in the same way.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Susana, would you like to speak to this question?
Well, I think it is not referred exactly to Mexico City, but yes, to the integration in general of the deported, the reintegration of their communities or their cities. The experience that we have, the testimonies that we have is that it's been really difficult for them to reintegrate to their families, even to their job, to have a good job, because sometimes they have been out for decades. And so we know about some universities that are having some strengthening programs in order to reintegrate them to the community in general, but even to their families, beginning to reconstruct the social tissue, and then to give them capacities to reintegrate to the job. They sometimes have the language. If they speak English, sometimes they are being integrated to give English classes. But even it's been hard for them to reintegrate, and they now, as they say sometimes, now they are not from them, not for here, no. So they have not a really like they have a confused identity. I mean, and that's why it's been hard for the cities and families to reintegrate them. I think that it's needed to construct some infrastructure and programs, capacity programs, or sensitivity programs to reintegrate them.
Thank you, Susanna. I'd like to just ask one final question that's been posed by the audience, and it's been posed specifically to Maria and Susanna, but I want to open it up to Mariana as well, because I think it touches on what all three of you are doing and its potential connectivity to state-sponsored diplomacy at the national level. And the question reads, I understand that there are now over 50 Mexican consulates in the United States. In fact, I believe there are 53 now, if I'm not mistaken. In terms of the arts, Maria, and labor mobility, Susanna, does your work involve working with Mexican consulates here? And what about the Mexican embassy in Washington, D.C.? And I'm just wondering, what are your relationships, if any, all three of you, to your work with the consulates, with the embassy? And if your answer is, I'm not working with them currently, have you considered it? And could it be useful to what you're doing? So let's begin with Susanna, if we may.
Thank you, David. The work that we have with some consulates, it's really few, is when they die in the United States, and we need to help family to return them to their communities. Sometimes it's been difficult because they do not, the consulates do not have a budget for these issues. Sometimes they help us. It depends on the budget that they have. So, well, I think that it's the only issue that we're being involved with consulates in the United States, Mexican consulates. And it's
that is such an, oh, please, I'm sorry.
No, just finishing that it's not being easy. Sometimes it's really helpful, but sometimes they do not have the capacity. Yeah.
That is a very important role that consulates play that many people are not aware of, a very pastoral role, I might add. Mariana, what would you say to this question?
So we do have a lot of work with consulates and the embassy, of course. Part of the work that we do is having this relationship, let's say, with the national government. So we do work a lot together in different spaces and in different activities. And these representations abroad are key to our work. Just maybe two examples. When politicians or staff from those cities, let's say Houston, come to Mexico City, they also go through the Mexican consulates there and try to facilitate their logistics and accommodation here in Mexico City. So we do have these conversations very often to receive properly our visitors from other cities. And kind of the same applies when we do go to other cities. Here in, we're specifically talking about cities in the US. We do also make contact with the consulates to let know that we are going. Sometimes they participate in the same events that we go, etc. And that's also the case with the embassy. So yeah, a lot of work together.
Thank you so much, Mariana. And finally, I'd like to give the last word to the newly minted Dr. Fernandez Hall. Tell us, what is your contact with consulates or the embassy, if you are, and would that be of interest to you if you are not working with them now?
Thank you so much for this question. I think here it's a good moment for me to clarify if it wasn't super clear already, but I just graduated from the UNAM, so I'm not in that institution. And at all that, I do more volunteer work. So I'm not like part of their, or like leadership, right? I think one cool thing about the movement of people who are returned and deported in Mexico City is that the movement has really matured. And now everyone in leadership is actually a person who has that migratory experience. So I personally don't know if Ola, for example, is in contact with the consulates. I'm not in contact at all. What I do know is that they protested when Jose Delgado, the man who I was telling you who needed blood transfusions every day, died, because he was deported with the collaboration of one of the consulates, so the one in Washington State, so not the embassy. But yeah, so that's all that I know. And yeah, I think it would be of interest to be in contact. There's always like a certain tension when there's a protest and the government is involved, because you can't really protest with the government involved. I don't know if that makes sense, but right. So like if there's a march for women's rights, it doesn't really make sense if there's a contingent from the government, because a march will always be somehow a challenge to power, right? So I don't really know if it would make like a lot of sense in terms of the artistic productions that I've been working on, but I do think that definitely we need to have contact in order to make demands, right? So I think in that sense that definitely it would be good to be in contact with the consulates. And I would also really love to be in contact with Mariana Flores, just to send this document over and see how we can be in touch. And also Susanna Cruikshank, amazing work. Thank you.
Well, on that theme, I just want to say what an extraordinary pleasure it's been to be in this space with all three of you. I think you come from one of the most extraordinary cities I have ever had the privilege of visiting, and I look forward to doing so again. And perhaps I will get to see you in that wonderful city. But thank you so much for your time and your energy and your care and your thought and what you've put into these comments. You've been such a wonderful benefit to us and to our students. And so Mariana Flores Mayan, Marina Cristina Fernandez, and Susanna Cruikshank Sorio, thank you so much. And thank you. And we hope to see you again soon. And perhaps we can bring you physically here the next time.
Thank you for
Thank you. Well,